This is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats. I'm your host, Jim Cuddy. As we celebrate another year of independence, Americans are asking what happened to the Fourth Amendment protections of privacy and the 15th Amendment guarantee of voting rights. Law professor Michael Greenberger, a Homeland Security expert, explains what the leak of national security secrets may mean. Law professor Michael Higginbotham reflects on changes in affirmative action and the Voting Rights Act. And Bill Press interviews the acting Secretary of Labor, Seth Harris. Are you tired of Tea Party Republicans and Rush Limbaugh dominating the airwaves? Do you want the facts you won't get on Fox or even on CNN? Then stay tuned. Our sponsor, 21st Century Democrats, works hard to get everyday Democrats involved in returning our party to its roots and to success at the ballot box. Sit back and listen, then stand up and fight. And follow 21st Century Democrats on Facebook for all the latest progressive news. We're glad you can join us. Law professor Michael Greenberger is an expert on Homeland Security issues, and he warns that the National Security Agency's sweep of phone numbers and emails is indeed, quote, a serious Fourth Amendment question, close quote. And joining us today on americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats, Michael Greenberger is a University of Maryland law professor who teaches in two areas: financial regulation, especially futures and derivatives, and homeland security. It is in that latter capacity we invited Professor Greenberger, who is founding director of the University of Maryland Center for Health and Homeland Security, with over 60 professionals on staff working on over 90 homeland security contracts worldwide. He has also served as chair of the Maryland Governor's Emergency Management Advisory Council. Professor Greenberger, thank you so much for joining us today on americasdemocrats.org.
I'm happy to be here.
Now, as a law professor, do you believe that the National Security Agency's collection of data about phone calls and emails violates the Fourth Amendment?
Well, that's a complicated question. Let me say this, that every time one of these surveillance initiatives has been tested, it has been upheld by the courts. This initiative, which is probably as broad-based as you're going to find, all telephone calls of a certain character, to my mind, are so far removed from Fourth Amendment protections that I think it's a serious question as to whether or not they violate the Fourth Amendment. The Fourth Amendment was designed to avoid what are called general warrants, where you get a warrant to just broadly search a large area or a large number of people. And I think by any rational definition, the way they've gone about doing this has strong characteristics of a general warrant. And the final thing I would say is if an issue of this sort ever got to the Supreme Court, the traditional 5-4 conservative-liberal split would not be predictive of what would happen, because Justice Scalia, Justice Kennedy are pretty strong protectors of the Fourth Amendment, and for that matter, on occasion, so has Clarence Thomas been. So you have three of the conservative judges who I think their response to a program of this sort is not easily predicted. That's a lot of words to say. I think there's a serious Fourth Amendment question with these issues.
Mm-hmm. How would you strike a balance between national security and privacy at a time when most Americans are concerned about terrorism?
Well, it's true that most Americans are concerned about terrorism, but most Americans are also concerned and worried about protecting their personal privacy. It is very hard to make an assessment of where the balance has been struck in the initiative that Mr. Snowden has brought to the world's attention. I will say that I'm very skeptical that the positive accomplishments of this program that have been articulated, for example, by the head of the National Security Agency are correct, and I think the public needs more information and more convincing information about that. I am suspicious that a much more targeted program that doesn't get all phone calls from one kind from one location to another, or with regard to the PRISM program, has ready access to social media. I am not convinced that a more targeted approach where the government is asking for specifics rather than a fishing expedition would not be both a better protection for personal privacy and satisfy our national security needs.
We're speaking with University of Maryland law professor Michael Greenberger. As a legal matter, is what Edward Snowden did covered in any way at all by whistleblower protections, or should it be? And what do you think ought to happen to him? Sorry for the multiple questions in one, but...
No, I think those are good questions. But let me just say that I think as the laws are written, he has violated his obligation to use his security clearance in a proper way, and he has revealed information that should not have been revealed. So he may be a whistleblower, but he's done the whistleblowing in a way that raises serious legal problems for him. I think it's a mistake here not to look at the bigger problem. We have to resolve the problem of Mr. Snowden and his legal status. But the bigger problem here that everybody is missing is that we have a system. Let's assume, for example, that what he revealed are true intrusions on the protection of the United States national security. How do we have a system where this young man who doesn't have a high school diploma and is working for a private company that is making huge profits over doing the work that should be done by those that are in the federal government itself? In other words, we've contracted out to his employer, Booz Allen, who's getting paid large amounts of money to do the work that should be done by the government itself and people who are vetted by the government. There's some indication even that Mr. Snowden's application was challenged in the vetting process when he was hired by Booz Allen, but he was hired nevertheless. But how does the United States, if you assume that we have very important secrets to protect, are having a private consulting company take over that issue and making decisions about who's going to protect the secrets? We've just got too broad a category of people handling these secrets, and by focusing on where Snowden is and whether we can get him back or not is sort of chasing the horse after the barn door was closed. I think the bigger issue that needs to be asked is, how are we protecting the secrets of the country that need to be protected? And this is a jerry-rigged Rube Goldberg system, and that to me is the real problem here, and that's the problem that's been avoided in the discussions.
What lessons do you think can be taken so far about both the fact of the government's domestic intelligence operations and the public reaction to it?
Well, I don't think it's all that clear that there's a uniform view among the public. I mean, you look at different polling operations, and some show the public worries more about terrorism than privacy, but others show that the concerns among the public are evenly split. Frankly, all this worry about where Snowden is and the name-calling of, for example, Hong Kong, and taking Hong Kong over the coals, to me is amounts to whining. We're either going to get Snowden or we're not going to get Snowden. The secrets are out there. Apparently, the information he has already been downloaded to the Chinese and to the Russians. The bigger problem is, what do we do in the future? And what we should be doing in the future is having a careful, serious reassessment of what our national security information is, how we're gathering it, and setting up a system where you don't have a person without a high school diploma carrying the entire secrets of the United States around in his computers and other equipment.
I question, how does he get the security clearance to get the garner the information that he did, and how easy is it now to get that level of security clearance? I mean, that sort of bothers me too.
Oh yes, that's a very good point. Security clearances are granted almost on a routine basis, and by the way, much of the investigation and vetting of individuals and security clearances is done by investigators who are on contract to the United States. We don't even have United States personnel making the initial investigations in many cases into who's getting the security clearance. There are far too many security clearances issued. Look, if these secrets are as damaging as the NSA is telling us they are, how do we get a system where this young man, who really had trouble passing the vetting process at Booz Allen, has the entirety of the United States secrets in his computer systems and is walking around the world with it? That's the real problem here. I think we both have to make a decision of what our secrets are, and if we have important secrets, they should be protected by people who have a better profile than Mr. Snowden does. The further question is, and we don't have all the information available to make this determination, but is this broad-based data mining process, which is targeted very, very broadly, is that really necessary? Again, we've been told that this 40 instances of having protected or prevented terror attacks. Many people who have knowledge of this have disputed that kind of credit for this program. The president himself has said this will provoke a healthy debate, and I think the American public needs to take this very seriously. But most important, everybody's focusing on Snowden. The damage has already been done with Snowden. If he's done something wrong, we get him back, fine, we prosecute him. But how does a person like Snowden become the keeper of this mass of material which the National Security Agency says is threatening to our national security?
When, and even if Americans woke up tomorrow and demanded limits on the collection of data about themselves, is there any way to get that genie back in the bottle at this point?
Well, first of all, I think Americans should be, who are concerned about this, and you may have one concern about the surveillance being too broad, but I think, as I keep repeating, a second concern is, how does a person without a high school diploma have access to the entirety of the nation's surveillance secrets? I think it's important for Americans who are concerned about this at any level to make their concern clear to their members of Congress, to the White House. I think it's not too late to get the genie out of the bottle. I mean, we have infinity ahead of us going forward, and the question is, can we conceive of a better system, both of a more targeted surveillance program that achieves our national security objectives, and secondly, making sure the people who have access to our secrets is a much more limited class of people. They should, in my mind, be employees of the United States, and their competency should exceed a failure to receive a high school diploma.
Mm-hmm. And I guess at minimum, the entire vetting process at least should be handled by
Absolutely.
the United States government.
I'm very. I myself am often interviewed about former students or employers about the vetting process, and I think those that try and gather the information are doing a very good job, but I think it's a very unreliable system. I have no faith that system provides decision makers with the information, the real information they need as to whether someone is reliable in terms of national security.
Okay. Michael Greenberger, University of Maryland law professor. He is the founding director of the University of Maryland Center for Health and Homeland Security and chair of the Maryland Governor's Emergency Management Advisory Council. Professor Greenberg, thank you so much for joining us today on americasdemocrats.org. We look forward to speaking with you again soon.
You're welcome.
And this is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for Stand Up Democrats. We want you to sit back and listen, but we need you to stand up and fight. Do you want to get involved and help get our party back to its roots and to success at the ballot box? You can make your contribution to Democrats for America's Future and help us keep this show going and to elect Democrats who will stand up for democratic principles. Go to americasdemocrats.org and click on Donate at the top of the page. This is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for Stand Up Democrats. The Supreme Court ended its term by setting back progress on affirmative action and on voting rights. Law professor Michael Higginbotham, author of a new book called Ghosts of Jim Crow, analyzes the meaning of those cases. That's coming up in just a moment. Right now, we turn to Jim Hightower, America's #1 populist, for his common sense commentary.
Thank God for Congress, right? When things get out of balance in America, we can always count on our legislative stalwarts to recalibrate the scales of justice. Take greed, for example. The Wall Street barons who wrecked our real economy with their greed-fueled casino games are playing the same games again while pushing Washington to let them keep their public subsidies, fat bonuses, and special low tax rates. So our Congress critters turn their legislative guns on avarice. Unfortunately, their aim was a bit off. Instead of popping the overprivileged, Congress hit the most unprivileged Americans, people on food stamps. Too many families are getting food stamps, they shrieked, driving the cost of this poverty program to record levels. Yoo-hoo, knuckleheads. Record numbers of our people are on food stamps today because, guess what? Record numbers of them are unemployed or underemployed and have been knocked all the way down into poverty. Yet, the Tea Party Republicans now ruling the U.S. House are demanding cuts of as much as $25 billion a year in food stamp benefits, which would prevent some 13 million Americans, half of them children, from receiving the program's groceries. Representative Michelle Bachmann rose in a biblical falsetto to rationalize this. If anyone will not work, neither should he eat. Hello, Michelle, that's not quite what Jesus said. Also, many of these people are working, but not paid enough to make ends meet, and many more are desperately seeking jobs that aren't there. This is Jim Hightower saying, in fairness, though, the GOP did vote to give these food stamp applicants something, drug tests. I don't recall that Jesus at the Sea of Galilee required anyone to pee in the cup before getting fishes and loaves. And if he had done so, he would have required the bankers to take the first cups.
Need an antidote to the progressive blues? Want some good news about how grassroots folks are rebelling against the corporate powers and winning? Well, here's an easy-to-swallow pill for you, the Hightower Lowdown. Hightower's monthly newsletter will give you the lowdown, even as it lifts you up. It's 4 pages a month, jam-packed with facts you can use, actions you can take, and Jim's own Texas humor, all for only $15 a year. To become a lowdowner, go to hightowerlowdown.org.
This is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for Stand Up Democrats. Civil rights law expert Michael Higginbotham says it was a sad and tragic week at the Supreme Court. He warns that educational opportunity for minorities will be limited, and tremendous discrimination at the ballot box is going to go unchecked. And joining us now on americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats, F. Michael Higginbotham is a law professor at the University of Baltimore, specializing in constitutional law and human rights. He is the chair of the Maryland Attorney General's Task Force on Electronic Weapons, a member of the Council on Foreign Relations, and the former chairperson of the Association of American Law Schools Committee on Recruitment and Retention of Minority Faculty. He is also the author of a new book called Ghosts of Jim Crow, Ending Racism in Post-Racial America. Professor Higginbotham, thank you so much for joining us today on americasdemocrats.org.
Well, it's wonderful to be with you.
Now, before we get into the ghosts of Jim Crow, what does the term post-racial America mean?
Well, when I think of the term post-racial America, I think of a society where race is no longer a significant factor, either in the opportunities that are provided or the hardships that are endured by individuals. I'm not talking about a colorblind society. I'm thinking about a society where differences are embraced, but where those differences do not result in any negative notions or stigma attached to those differences.
What are some of the ghosts that affect the well-being of African Americans and other minorities today?
Well, let me give you a couple of examples. In 2005, in Maryland, there was a housing development being built in the southern area of the state, known as the Indian Headland Development. And there was a security guard William Fitzpatrick, who was watching over the structures as they were being built to protect them. And doing a good job that security guards can do, he noticed three individuals who were setting fires, and he called the police. These individuals were arrested for arson. And during the trial process, one of the individuals, Jeremy Parody, when asked why they committed these arsons, he said that blacks were buying these homes and would be moving into the neighborhoods, and they wanted to prevent that. And to me, this is a classic example of tipping point bigotry, a notion that was rampant during Jim Crow and continues with us today as exemplified by Mr. Parody's comment about why he and the other fellows committed these arsons. And I think when Americans think about the extent of housing segregation that continues in this country today, I think it's important to keep in mind this tipping point bigotry notion that some of us still seem to possess and that can manifest itself in very harsh and violent ways, as arson would suggest. And so I think it's important to keep in mind that aspect when you think about the extent of housing segregation that exists. Let me give you another example. 2011, in a suburb outside of Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, a fellow by the name of Marcus Allen, a 9-year-old child, was a member of a day camp facility in inner city Philadelphia. And his facility did not have a swimming pool. And so many of the children, and they were predominantly black children, wanted to go swimming during the summer months, as many of us do when it gets extremely hot. And the director of this camp facility arranged for them to use a suburban Philadelphia facility, the Valley Camp Swim Center, for 30 days for the kids from this inner city camp to go swimming. When they showed up on the first day, the white children in the pool got out, and the manager requested that the black children leave the facility. And the next day, when interviewed, the manager said, I felt that I needed to cancel this contract because it would change the complexion of our facility. I think that reflects the social segregation that continues in our society today. And, of course, during Jim Crow, swim facilities and social activities were separated. And today we still have issues of separation in social activities, and I think this example with the Valley Day Camp swim facility exemplifies that social separation that continues in many of our activities. Let me give you just one more example, because the two examples I gave you, those individuals can talk about it. Marcus Allen and William Fitzpatrick can talk about what they saw, what they heard, but there are individuals that can no longer talk about it, and one of them is Troy Davis, who in 2011 was executed by the state of Georgia, a capital sentencing case for the murder of an off-duty police officer. Troy Davis was black. The off-duty police officer was white. It's a tragedy, of course, when any person in our society is murdered, and particularly a police officer on duty or off duty. But in the circumstances surrounding this case, there was real doubt as to whether or not Troy Davis was involved in any crime. And he was convicted of first-degree murder and executed. And when you look at disparities in our criminal justice system today, particularly in the administration of capital punishment, there are huge disparities if you are a black defendant and your victim is white and you're convicted. Huge disparities. There's a famous case called McCleskey versus Kemp, a 1987 Supreme Court decision, where the defendant, Warren McCleskey, a black man, submitted statistical evidence indicating that there was a 4-to-1 disparity in the administration of capital punishment in Georgia. Goes up to the Supreme Court in a 5-to-4 decision. The majority of the court says that while we may accept Warren McCleskey's statistical evidence of this 4-to-1 disparity, our notion of equality, of constitutional equality, does not prevent such discrimination. And 4 dissenters, including Thurgood Marshall and William Brennan, 2 of my favorite justices, 4 dissenters said some of the most powerful words I've ever heard written in a dissenting opinion. And they said, what would be so wrong with us accepting Mr. McCleskey's argument and his statistical disparity? We think the majority has a fear of too much justice. And for me, I'm afraid of a whole lot of things in this society today, particularly watching Twilight Zone reruns in the dark. But I've never, ever been afraid of too much justice, and I suspect that most of your listeners aren't either. And so when you start to think about what's going on in our society, there are activities, whether it be in the criminal justice system, such as capital punishment, whether it be in social activities, such as segregation in swimming pools, whether it be, with housing segregation. These are reflective of course, Jim Crow notions and sentiments, and that's why the book is named Ghosts of Jim Crow.
We're speaking with Michael Higginbotham, law professor at the University of Baltimore, specializing in constitutional law and human rights, and we're talking a little bit about his new book, Ghosts of Jim Crow, Ending Racism in Post-Racial America. So, Professor, the first 2 cases you mentioned, the one in Southern Maryland, and I was familiar with that one, appalling that here we are in the 21st century and these types of things are happening. And then the second one I was unaware of. And then you brought up the Supreme Court. And so that takes me to this question of what do you take away, the meaning of the recent Supreme Court decisions on affirmative action and voting rights? This, to me, what you just told us a minute ago, underscores how tragic the decisions that the Supreme Court came up with, in fact, are.
Jim, I couldn't agree with you more. It's a sad and tragic week in many respects, but it also, I think, is also a very positive week and week for celebration in other respects. And when you talk about the Supreme Court decisions, certainly the voting rights decision in Shelby County and the Fisher decision in the affirmative action case, in my judgment, are very problematic. And what I would say about the Shelby County decision, which basically what it basically did was look at a particular section, the the formula coverage section, Section 4B of the Voting Rights Act, and basically said that was unconstitutional. And it's unconstitutional according to the majority because things have changed. Progress has been made, and as a result of that, Congress needs to update the formula because those states that are covered, it's no longer clear that those states that are covered need such coverage. There's no proof. There's no correlation between what's going on in those states today and the protection against race discrimination in voting. It's a tragic case. It's a very unfortunate case. And the reason why I think it's so problematic is because while changes in progress have been made, much of that progress has been made because of anti-discrimination provisions such as the Voting Rights Act. And what causes me great concern is that if we take these provisions away prior to erasing some of the notions that we still bring from the Jim Crow days, that we're going to revert back. And sort of some of the examples I gave you caused me great concern to think if we start eliminating protections like the Voting Rights Act, we're going to have situations of tremendous discrimination that goes unchecked and that is not prevented. So I'm really concerned about the voting rights decision. The Fisher case, dealing with affirmative action, what I would say about that is, and basically what happened is the case reaffirmed Justice O'Connor's 2003 decision, which basically said that affirmative action is permissible under certain limitations, under a strict scrutiny rationale in terms of higher education. This Fisher case really continued a sort of 20-year-long Supreme Court review of affirmative action, beginning with Bakke, that basically said affirmative action is constitutionally permissible, but under severe limitations. And the Fisher case basically added an additional limitation to the limitations provided in the Grutter case in Gratz, which basically said you need a compelling government interest and the program must be narrowly tailored. So for me, it's important for listeners to understand the significance of both of these cases. But with respect to Fisher, Fisher deals with access and opportunity in education. And the truth of the matter is, when you look at Jim Crow segregation and Plessy versus Ferguson case, dealing with train separation on trains, Plessy was going to get to the same point on the train as everyone else, even though he was segregated. He's going to get off at the same point. But when you look at access and opportunity in education, not in transportation, it becomes hugely significant because if minorities don't have access and opportunity in education, they're not going to end up in the same place as everybody else. So that's why Fisher and Shelby are just so important, because they allow for access and opportunity, and so we really have to be careful, particularly in the Shelby case. I think Congress needs to step up. They need to do the right thing rather than the political thing for a change, and they need to reauthorize the Voting Rights Act consistent with what the court has suggested. And in Fisher, I think we've just merely affirmative action is still alive, but we've merely postponed another review of it, and the Supreme Court took a case for next term called Schwett, which is out of Michigan, in which will examine a referendum prohibiting affirmative action to be used. And I think that's going to be a really significant decision, because if the court allows affirmative action to be prohibited by referendum, then basically you're opening up this opportunity to states to simply, based on the will of the majority, to eliminate opportunity and access in higher education.
We've had several economists on this program talk about the destructive nature of income inequality. How much of a racial component is there?
I think income inequality is really, one of the most important struggles for the immediate future. one of the things that was so alarming to me in doing the research for my book was some of the alarming statistics when you're talking about economic inequality. The thing that jumped out so much to me was a 20-to-1 differential between wealth accumulation for black families and wealth accumulation for white families. I thought that had to be wrong. It's so overwhelmingly, huge gap. And in triple checking it, it is correct. And the 20-to-1 gap seems to be one that's getting even larger, not smaller. And so, I think it was maybe a 10-to-1 gap a while back, and now it's even larger. And so, for me, it's a huge concern because economic inequality spills over to so many other things. I mean, if economically you have differences, it's hard to integrate on all levels. When you start looking at school separation, for example, what you find is, in terms of our public schooling, what you find is many minorities. I think it's definitely over 40%, maybe over 50% of racial minorities today are in schools that are hyper impoverished, and they're also super segregated. And so when you start to look at income inequity and the impact that has on opportunities, on ways to change your economic status, it is really frightening, because if you're at an impoverished institution, it's going to be much harder for you to, in fact, achieve, and then it's going to be much harder for you to move up through the economic ranks. Mm-hmm. So I think what we're doing is, we have an unequal playing field, and it's important for us to attempt to level that playing field and to continue to level the playing field. And I think we're not doing a good enough job on that.
Okay. Michael Higginbotham is a law professor at the University of Baltimore. His new book, Ghosts of Jim Crow, Ending Racism in Post-Racial America. Professor, we really appreciate your time with us today on americasdemocrats.org and look forward to speaking with you again soon.
Oh, it's my pleasure.
And this is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats. We want you to sit back and listen, but we need you to stand up and fight. Help get our party back to its roots and to success at the ballot box. Make your contribution to Democrats for America's Future to keep this show on the air and help elect stand-up Democrats. Go to americasdemocrats.org and click on Donate at the top of the page. This is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats. And now, Bill Press and his guest, Acting Secretary of Labor, Seth Harris.
We're coming to you live from our nation's capital, our studio on Capitol Hill. Brought to you today by the American Federation of Teachers, the good men and women of the AFT under President Randy Weingarten, making a difference in America's classrooms every day. You bet you can find out more about their good work by going to their website, aft.org. Just a few of the AFT members, part of America's great army of working families, represented and fought for every day here in our nation's capital by the Department of Labor. The Acting Secretary of Labor, Seth Harris, joins us in studio this morning. Mr. Secretary, nice to see you.
Bill, great to be with you.
You know, when she was their reigning secretary, Hilda Solis was in the studio here once a month to talk about the new job numbers that came out. So we have a good relationship with her and with you.
Great. Well, it's a pleasure to be here. She did a great job. I'm going to try and live up to the standard.
Oh, she did. And Tom Perez is still hovering sort of like a plane over O'Hare waiting to land.
Waiting
right?
for him to get there. He's terrific.
A good man. Yeah.
Fantastic public servant. We've been close friends for a long time. Cares about working people. Got a great agenda that he's going to bring with him to the department. We're going to be a great team. I'm looking forward to working with him.
Well, it's interesting that one of the issues that Republicans seem to have against him, from what I see, is the minimum wage. I mean, he's been a real champion of raising the federal minimum wage. which is something that you've been talking about particularly a lot this week with the 75th anniversary of the Fair Labor Standards Act, which was adopted then under President, what would that make it?
President Roosevelt.
FDR.
That's right.
Yeah.
His labor secretary, Francis Perkins, had worked with him in New York State on improving working conditions for working families in New York. And when he asked her to join his cabinet and to become the first ever woman to serve in the U.S. cabinet, she said, I'll do it if you'll allow me to work on a law that will set a floor on wages, a soft ceiling on hours, and will outlaw exploitative child labor. And, of course, he let her do it. She worked hard on it. The Labor Department drafted the Fair Labor Standards Act, pushed for it. President Roosevelt, pushed for it very hard and put in place the first ever national minimum wage at 25 cents an hour.
No. Yeah. I was just going to ask you what it was at that time. Imagine that, 25. That's probably still what it is in Bangladesh.
I'm not sure there is a minimum wage in Bangladesh right now.
I don't know. So where are we today with the minimum wage? The president has made a proposal, and is Congress anywhere close to taking action on it?
Well, I'm actually optimistic. We had a hearing earlier this week chaired by Senator Tom Harkin, who's one of the leading advocates
a real
in Congress.
champion on this. Yeah,
terrific,
absolutely.
and has been for decades. So we had a hearing. I think that there's some hope that the proposal is going to move. The president's proposed increasing the minimum wage from $7.25 an hour to $9 an hour, and then indexing it to the cost of living. So 15 million Americans would get a raise under the president's proposal, and it'll lift a lot of people out of poverty. What the president said in the State of the Union address is no American living in the richest country on earth should work full-time and still be stuck in poverty. And so this increase will help to lift them out of poverty.
How many people would benefit from that? I found that
15 million.
15 million.
Yeah,
that's
imagine.
I mean, that's amazing.
Yeah, I mean, and why is it that Congress makes it so easy to extend tax cuts for the wealthiest of Americans, and it's so difficult to talk about a minimum wage for 15 million Americans?
Exactly right. You know, I've been traveling around the country meeting with minimum wage workers, trying to give them an opportunity to tell me their stories and try and make their stories central to the debate here in Washington. Because so often, political discussion quickly gets off into these abstract policy concepts and economics. Yeah. I wanted the lives of these families to be right at the core of this discussion, and the stories they told me were poignant, powerful stories about excruciating choices they have to make between buying fresh food for their kids or buying clothes for their kids, buying, do I fix my car so I can get to work, or do I fix my heat so my family will be warm in the winter?
Yeah.
None of them, not one of them, has said, I have savings so that if I have an unexpected expense, I can, cover it. It's not a problem. If my car breaks down, I can cover. They're stuck. Many of them are living on the edge. Some of them are over the edge. One woman, Patty Federico in Boston, said to me, when I said to her, well, you're living paycheck to paycheck, she said, no, I'm not. Living paycheck to paycheck would be an improvement in my life. She's really struggling to get by on the basic necessities.
So I can't do the math in my head that quickly. I was never that good at math anyway. But so if you're getting the minimum wage is $7.25 right today. So if you're working a 40-hour week at $7.25, what are you making roughly a year?
Well, this increase would get you an additional $3,500 a year. Right now, if you're working full-time, you're making about $14,500 a year. So this would take you to about $18,000 a year.
Okay,
but let me just say, by no measure, easy street.
I was just going to say, we're quibbling about people not even wanting them to make $18,000 a year. Imagine trying to make it with a couple of kids, right?
Exactly.
On $18,000 a year.
Exactly right. They're struggling, and that's what they've told me. We brought them to the White House. We had an event to commemorate the 75th anniversary of the Fair Labor Standards Act. Vice President Biden got up, gave an impassioned speech about the importance. He's been good on this issue for a long time. He's been terrific. He also told a story, let me say, about his mom and how she had been taken care of by a home health aide, and talked about how outrageous it is that home health aides in America don't even get the minimum wage. They're not protected by the Fair Labor Standards Act. No minimum wage, no guarantee of overtime. We're working on a rule right now with the White House to change that so that these 2 million, mostly women of color, will get this raise, get this protection under the law, and will really have an opportunity to move into the middle class.
I know that's one group that AFSCME particularly. I've talked to President Lee Saunders about this, trying to organize to help them get their rights. So come back to Congress. You had a hearing this week. Has it? I've just lost track of it. Has it moved out of either house?
It hasn't yet, and we're talking now with Senator Harkin and his staff about what the strategy is for moving the bill to a vote. There would be a markup in the Senate committee, I expect, first, and then we'll hopefully get to action in the Senate. You have to remember that this has long been a bipartisan issue. You know, the minimum wage, and you've watched this very closely.
Well,
Bill,
a lot of stuff used to be bipartisan.
That's true. That's true. But, you know, I mean, remember back in the mid-1990s when Dick Armey, who was the majority leader in the House, Republican majority leader, said, they'll pass this bill over my dead body. But then under Newt Gingrich's leadership, we were able to get a minimum wage through a Republican conservative House of Representatives. George W. Bush, no screaming labor radical he, signed an increase in the minimum wage 5 years ago, 6 years ago.
That's the last time it was
That was
raised,
the last increase.
Yeah.
So I think there's hope here. I think there's enough people of goodwill on both sides who care about giving a raise to America that we're going to see a minimum wage increase sometime in the next year.
Seth Harris is the acting Secretary of Labor here for the United States. He's in studio with us. The minimum wage from $7.25 to $9 an hour. That is President Obama's proposal. Your thoughts, your comments, always welcome at 866-55-PRESS, 866-55-77-377. What about the sort of goes maybe hand in hand with this, the extension of unemployment benefits, which is another unresolved issue, right? Because it gets all tied up in the
this is
budget negotiations and everything.
This ends up being part of the end-of-year struggle over fiscal policy and monetary policy that we see in Congress. Right now, we have extended unemployment benefits for millions of American workers. We're going to have another discussion about whether we extend them further or whether we scale them back. The big challenge is to get people back to work. You know, we still have 11.7 million unemployed Americans, 4.4 million who've been unemployed for 6 months or longer, about almost a third, more than a third actually, of people who are unemployed right now are the long-term unemployed. One of the interesting things about the long-term unemployed is what we found is they're not any different from the short-term unemployed. They're not older. They're not less educated. They're just like the short-term unemployed. It's just they got hit by a wave in this terrible Great Recession back in the end of the Bush presidency, and they couldn't get back to the beach, and they're struggling now. So we're working on strategies for trying to get them back to work.
Is there any way that we'll ever be able to retrain these workers for different lines of work? Are the resources to do that? And are they interested in it?
I think they are interested. We're seeing a lot of enthusiasm in around the country. We're right now engaged in a $2 billion. It's okay. The $2 billion initiative that the president got included back in 2010 to give out $500 million a year over 4 years to community colleges to get them engaged with employers so that they can create programs that help workers who are out of work or trade affected to get into jobs that are in demand in their local economy right now and will be around into the long term.
Right, to give them the skills that the employers are looking for.
Exactly right. Exactly right.
Makes sense.
And a lot of long-term unemployed have lost some of their skills, or their skills are now obsolete. You know, in a lot of industries, healthcare being a good example, the skills demands change very, very rapidly. Technology comes in, new technology comes in. So we've got some cutting-edge programs in community colleges around the country that have been funded by the Labor Department under President Obama to develop really sophisticated programs in mechatronics and biosciences and advanced manufacturing and healthcare that are helping thousands of workers get back into the labor market and to succeed in these cutting-edge jobs.
Jobs. That's what we ought to be talking about. Not talking enough about lately, but we are this morning here with the Acting Secretary of Labor, Seth Harris. Not very often that you get to pose a question or make a comment to a member of the President's Cabinet. Here's your opportunity to do so here on the Full Court Press at 866-55-77-377, and we'll be right back.
Social with Bill Press. Like us at Facebook.com/Bill Press Show. This is The Bill Press Show.
About 13 minutes before the top of the hour, the Secretary of Labor, Acting Secretary of Labor, Seth Harris, in studio with us. Mr. Secretary, it's an honor to have you here this morning. Peter, what's going on? You have a little breaking news?
Yeah, just a couple moments ago, South African president spoke to the media. He says that Nelson Mandela's health improved overnight, which is very good news. His condition is still, they're still classifying it as critical, but they say he is stable. He did open his eyes more. He was a little more responsive, so we'll take the good news.
And I think the president goes to South Africa, President Obama, after Senegal, doesn't he? Or does he go to Tanzania next? Not sure what the order is.
I'm not sure. I have to look at the schedule, but yeah.
Yeah, but certainly they're keeping a very close watch on that hospital in Pretoria. in connection with President Obama's visit to Africa, and there are plans for the president to visit Nelson Mandela as long as he's still able to receive visitors. So, Mr. Secretary, we've been talking about the other big news this week, and it's related to the minimum wage, is action on immigration reform. It certainly looks like there's going to be a bill in the Senate. How will this impact the whole job market?
This is one of the surprising untold stories of the immigration reform debate, is that comprehensive immigration reform is a jobs bill. It's a bill that's good for our economy. So the Congressional Budget Office has put out an estimate that says that it will it could help our gross domestic product to grow by as much as 1.3%. That means $200 billion a year additional coursing through our economy. That'll help to create jobs. It'll bring down the budget deficit by $1 trillion, almost $1 trillion over the course of 20 years.
How is that so? Where's that coming from? Just that these families, now that their citizens will be spending more money? Or
there are several things that happen.
Yeah.
So first of all, this bill will help to bring in and keep in the United States a lot of very highly skilled immigrants from all around the world. These PhD and master's degree candidates who are foreign-born, who are studying in American institutions. It's so hard for them to get a green card to stay here right now. The system is so badly broken that it badly needs to be fixed. So we are working on, with the Senate right now, in this bill, to create what's called a STEM stapling strategy, which is if you get a PhD or a master's in a STEM field, science, technology, engineering, or mathematics, you get to stay in the United States. You get a green card as soon as you get your diploma. Those folks will create jobs. They'll drive innovation. Again, we don't talk about this very much. A quarter of small businesses started by immigrants. A quarter of high-tech startups started by small businesses. 40% of the Fortune 500 started either by immigrants or the children of immigrants. So these folks are driving innovation in our society. But there are other things that this bill will do. First of all, it'll create a lot more taxpayers. We have 11 million undocumenteds, most of them working in the United States right now. Millions of them not paying taxes. This bill will require them to pay taxes. That will strengthen Social Security and Medicare. It'll bring our deficits down overall. But also, it'll force employers who are hiring undocumenteds to quit cheating their competitors and to play by the rules. We have a lot of employers in America, particularly low-wage employers, who hire undocumented specifically for the purpose of driving their wages down, driving down their working conditions. That's bad for U.S. workers, it's bad for their competitors, and it hurts our economy. So all of those things taken together will help our economy to do better and create all of this additional wealth.
There's always been this fear, though, that having comprehensive immigration reform and allowing so many people to stay here who came here originally illegally will hurt American workers and take jobs from American workers.
Right. We hear that argument every time we talk about immigration. The fact of the matter is those undocumenteds are already here. Most of them are already working here. The question is, what's the competition going to look like? Is everybody going to play by the same set of rules, or are we going to let some employers get away with breaking the law and cheating these workers and cheating their competitors? This bill will significantly increase penalties on employers who hire undocumenteds. It'll establish a national E-Verify system so that it'll be harder to hire undocumenteds. It'll bring 11 million people out of the shadow so that they have the protection of American law and give them an earned pathway to citizenship.
And the labor unions are okay with the Senate bill the way it is now? Or?
The AFL-CIO, the Service Employees Union, AFSCME have enthusiastically endorsed the bill. They engaged in negotiation with the Chamber of Commerce to come to an agreement about non-immigrant workers, which is, let me just say, in an era of partisanship, as you were saying before, that's really a stunning accomplishment. I really congratulate Tom Donahue from the Chamber and Rich Trumka and Mary Kay Henry from SEIU, Rich from the AFL-CIO. They did a fantastic job coming to agreement. Lee Saunders has done a fantastic job on all of this stuff. I'm really proud of them because they've come together on this difficult issue, and they are all standing behind the president, standing with the Senate to get this bill passed.
All right. Now, next Friday is the first Friday in July, and that's when the job numbers will come out.
Right. I can't tell you what they are. I don't know. Sorry, I'm not going to scoop.
How do you know what my question
I'm
was
not
going to
scoop you. I'm sorry.
I don't want to wait till next Friday. You're here now, so let's just get it out of the way. Just tell us what the job numbers are for June. No.
Sorry, I'm not even going to guess at it. That's how you get in trouble. You get in big trouble if you do that.
Okay.
I really like this job. I don't want to get fired.
Well, I like this job by getting people fired. Anyhow, well, we'll wait then. Next Friday, and maybe you can come back in and talk to us about it.
That'd be great.
Mr. Secretary, great to see you. Thanks for the good job you're doing, okay?
Thanks, Bill. Great.
Give our best to all of our friends over at the Department of Labor.
That's all for AmericasDemocrats.org. Thank you to all who made today's show possible. Michael Greenberger, Michael Higginbotham, and the entire Bill Press team. And thank you for listening. If you liked what you heard, please get involved in our efforts to keep this show going and to elect Democrats who are bringing the party back to its roots. Go to AmericasDemocrats.org and click on Donate at the top of the page. And be sure to find 21st Century Democrats on Facebook. For AmericasDemocrats.org, I'm your host, Jim Cuddy. We want you to sit back and listen, but we need you to stand up and fight. Join us. Support the show and help elect Democrats who will stand up for democratic principles with your contribution today.